Hey, man. Your son's a material witness to a homicide.
I want you to tell me everything you saw.
You said we would be safe in Philadelphia.
Well, I was wrong.
You left with the Amish woman, right?
John, what's going on, man? What is happening?
Harrison Ford, Kelly McGillis.
If they find me, they find the boy.
Witness. Rated R. Starts Friday, February 8th at a theater near you. Check local newspapers.
Welcome back to Pantheon Plus. My name is Jerome Cuson. We are back here this month to talk about someone very special, someone near and dear to our hearts as a movie star. We are going to be discussing Harrison Ford. And I know what you're thinking. It's going to be a month of like Indiana Jones, Blade Runner, Star Wars, The Fugitive. Well, we're not going to review any of those movies. We're going to go a little deeper into the archives. We're going to look at some unheralded Harrison Ford movies, some maybe some underrated, maybe some movies you may not have heard of, maybe some movies you haven't seen before. And that's what our focus is going to be. And this, of course, is in honor of the fact that Indiana Jones 5 is coming out at the end of June. We, of course, are not reviewing any of the Indiana Joneses, but of course, those movies are near and dear to our hearts, especially the first and the third one, but never Crystal Skull. You can follow us on Twitter for now at Hero Pantheon. You can follow me on Twitter at JeromeC1985. The best thing that you can do is leave a 4 or 5 star review so as to help people discover the great work that we here at both Pantheon Plus as well as The Real World are doing. My co-host for this week and every week is Brian at Brian to Brain on Twitter. Brian, this week we are going to be reviewing the movie Witness, made in 1985, the year I was born. I just want to point that out. 1985, the year I was born. And I think that this is one of those movies that is underrated for a couple of reasons. Number one, when you think of 1985 films, you think of, I believe, Back to the Future. That is probably the quintessential, not only 1985, but one of the quintessential 1980s movies. But it is historical in a couple of ways. It is Harrison Ford's only Academy Award nomination. It is also the first collaboration between Peter Weir and Harrison Ford. They would go on to do other films as well. We're also going to talk about Peter Weir, in my mind, is a very underrated director, and we'll get into that as well. But Brian, I know that you are excited to talk about Harrison Ford because, look, as people who watch a lot of Star Wars and a lot of Indiana Jones, he is somebody that is very much on our minds. And when we were first becoming aware of films, like, he was one of the biggest movie stars, and maybe people don't even realize that at this point. But when we were first coming up 10, 11, 12 years old, Harrison Ford was the biggest star. And, you know, I think about some of his latter day movies, especially your Air Force Ones is very memorable. When he played Jack Ryan in a couple of movies, like, that's kind of what we were coming up with. So we're going to be covering a little bit of that when we talk about what lies beneath in the final of our 4 Harrison Ford specials. But we are going to be starting with 1985's Witness, which is very different, I would say, than almost any movie that we have reviewed up to this point, because it's got a little bit of romance, it's got a little bit of noir, but most importantly, Brian, we are going to be talking about a culture that, you know, I think doesn't get talked about a great deal in cinema, because it's very hard to talk about a culture when one of their deals is they don't really like modern technology and do not embrace modern technology. We're going to be talking about the Amish as well this week. And Brian, you are not allowed to make any Amish roadkill jokes this week.
Hey, that's not where I was going to go, because when I think of the Amish, I don't think of Amish roadkill from ECW 1999, like right off the top of my head. I think of Weird Al Yankovic and the Amish Paradise parody video, and I also think of Kingpin, which is a mixed bag. If you're a Farrelly Brothers fan, which many people are not, some are. That's one of the actual Farrelly Brothers movies I like, and it's got the Woody Harrelson bowling movie with one hand, and with one of the crazy Quaid brother, and they're in the Amish country, all that kind of stuff. That movie I do enjoy. But in terms of, I guess, the best visual representation we've ever gotten on screen, probably of the Amish, is probably Witness, because they do it out of respect. I feel like they treat the Amish country and people with respect in this film, which is very key, because I felt like in a different world or a different director, they could have poked fun of it. You know what I mean? They could have poked fun of the culture a little bit, kind of like what we see in the Amish Paradise video, kind of like what we see in Kingpin. But instead, they respected the culture, which I really appreciated. And once you do that, you kind of get to know the people for who they are, which makes that second act good. Because the second act kind of slows down a bit, but once you get to know the Amish people around him, I felt that was some really good character development and character building, especially for the John Book character. So overall, I can see why that this script is heralded as one of the top scripts of all time, even though I do have certain criticisms, and I think me and Jerome are on the same page on this one, where certain aspects of the whole cop conspiracy thing, which we will get into, kind of a lot of the details get put under the rug and shoved under the rug, and there's a lot of left on the table that you feel like, man, there's a lot to this conspiracy that goes deeper, but they barely touch the surface on it, and we only got some reveals of who the actual bad cops are in this police force. So we can talk about that later, because I feel like they can kind of build on that if there is a Witness follow-up, because knowing Paramount Plus, I mean, they can turn any IP into a show right now, and just, I mean, I don't know did they do Fatal Attraction? Is that Paramount Plus?
The Fatal Attraction series is coming out on a weekly basis as we speak, and basically what happened is I saw a lot of reviews that were like, you could skip this, and apparently everyone has, because I have literally heard nothing about this show. Doesn't help it comes out on Sunday when you've got Yellow Jackets, Succession, Barry, when those shows were coming out. Certainly doesn't help, but yeah, Fatal Attraction is no bueno. And look, is there a world where there could be a Witness TV show? Yes. Is there a world where it could be good? Maybe. Based on what I have seen, when you turn these movies into television shows, or you do like a rebooted sequel of some sort, they almost never work. And like, maybe with the exception of something like Wet Hot American Summer, like I remember really liking the one of the rebooted seasons, but other than that, not great, man. Like this should live on in our minds as just a movie, and that is perfectly acceptable, because what a great movie it is. Any other thoughts before we get into some of the notes?
Amazing cinematography, amazing score. Sometimes the score kind of goes a little off kilter a little bit, but I felt like towards the end and the suspense, it really elevates the suspense to another level. So once you got a movie that's clicking on all cylinders when it comes to like the building the suspense, and then with the music and everything, it kind of climaxes very well. You argue that the first act is probably the best or the best act. I would probably agree, but I would say that third act is really well done, and I felt like they set up a lot earlier in the movie, and we'll talk about that, where you kind of get what I really liked about the second act is they kind of give you this visual map of what the town is like, the Amish town, and then the silo, which we'll get into. But once you get that visual of the silo way earlier in the movie, you can kind of tell where it's going and where it builds up and climaxes to at the end.
That's what you're supposed to do, Brian. You're supposed to provide the geography of a space so that when a climax happens, you can understand where people are in relation to the space. This is not hard.
It's so simple, but we've talked about this where some movies can't figure that out, and then you end up with like this weird sense of suspense where they're trying, but you don't know what's going on. Yeah, we can talk about that later on. But man, that in terms of what you just said, establishing the set and this placement and everything, they did it perfectly for what they were setting up.
All right, so you mentioned the cinematographer. What if I were to tell you, Brian, the cinematographer of this movie is also the cinematographer for Mad Max Fury Road, that being John Seale? Would that surprise you?
No, because I looked it up as soon as I watched the first 30 minutes of this movie. I was like, this cinematographer must be someone special, because it's not Dean Kundi or someone with that kind of like cachet. But when I looked it up, I was like, oh, he did Mad Max. But did you notice the gap in between? Because it seems like he got out of retirement for Mad Max.
Yes, he did. Because he's an older gentleman, of course, and yeah, he came out of retirement for Mad Max Fury Road, and I mean, this movie looks great. Like, you just feel the texture throughout, and we'll get into that in a few minutes. But Kelly McGillis, who is the co-star, of course, and I would say she is best known for Top Gun, and especially with the Top Gun sequel. I know there was a lot of talk about should she be in the movie with a cameo, and there was some discussion by her about why she wasn't, and all of the various repeat showings of Top Gun across your cable networks. So Kelly McGillis has been in the news a little bit lately. She is, of course, a co-star in this one, and I think she does a very, very good job. And she apparently lived with an Amish widow and her 7 children for a while before filming to get their cadence down. They have a very particular way of speaking, which is unique, and makes for an interesting rhythm to the movie. There's a point Kelly McGillis playing a character named Rachel asks John Book, which I have to say is a pretty funny name. I mean, what a noirish name they give Harrison Ford, Brian. John Book.
Well, because he does it by the book, which I was expecting they were going to say something like that, but they didn't even do that. But which is good, because that would have been a really bad joke in a movie like this.
The screenplay would not have won an Academy Award if that joke was made.
No, it would not.
There are no actual Amish in this movie because they do not like to be photographed ever. So they were interested in the filming, and I guess they were politely watching at times. And again, I think one of the things that I really love about this movie is that you could just really tell that they are kind of where the Amish are at. Like, they are in actual locations. They are not in a studio. They're not on a soundstage. You feel that they're on this land and the great texture that comes with that. And I think you and I are in agreement that they treated them fairly, but I think we have to acknowledge the fact that we are outsiders and we are not necessarily the judge, jury, and executioners. There were some people for the National Committee for Amish Religious Freedom who called for a boycott of the film, citing fears that these communities were overrun by tourists because of its popularity. And I could definitely see that being concerned. I think even the movie kind of alludes to that. And I mean, look, I think that when exploring Amish culture, there are certainly problematic elements of it, but that is not for us to talk about here on this podcast. But in terms of like othering them or like bombarding them or like, you know, treating them as like a prop or like going to the zoo, not cool in my view. So I do want to acknowledge that while we believe that they were treated fairly, there are elements of this community that definitely did not share the sentiment that this was a fair portrayal or one that was positive for the community.
Yeah, to be fair, I can honestly see that, but then again, it's like they're never going to watch it, so how could they really judge it? And they did it out of fear, like you said, so it's really like, you know, it's really hard to play that line, but I feel like they played the line fairly enough. You know what I mean? They didn't cross the line like Kingpin pretty much does. But you know what? And you know, to an extent, Weird Al does it as well. But I felt like Weird Al, I don't know, it felt like something like Weird Al would have gone out of his way to like kind of make sure like some of that stuff was okay to do and not necessarily make fun of the culture as a whole. So that's my take on like the whole Weird Al Amish Paradise video, and I know he pissed off like the rap community and the Amish community at the same time, but that's kind of like part of the nature of the parody. So in this case, there was no parody here. It was just, I think, a proper representation of what they wanted to show the culture as, and tied into the murder mystery. You know what I mean? So I think that balance was played out well. The only thing I felt like was that the Kelly McGillis character, I felt like she was like too romanticized a little bit too much, and I felt like as an Amish, you know, as a strong Amish woman, I felt like she would have just kind of like had, you know, no soul, you know, the Harrison Ford advances or whatever, and like that dancing scene kind of rubbed me the wrong way a little bit. I felt like her character would have shown a stronger, you know, stance on that and just not have any of it. You know what I mean? I would have enjoyed that more out of her character as opposed to her leaning into like, oh, you know, society and, you know, normal society. No, this is what music is like. So they kind of romanticized that a little bit. I almost felt like they almost pushed it to the limit where it's almost fetishized a little bit about we got to take this like hot Amish woman and bring her to the real world kind of thing. So that's where I was kind of like a little, iffy on that part of the script and that scene. That's kind of like my least favorite scene is where they're dancing in the barn. But in terms of that, I felt like they did treat the whole society as very respectfully, and I think it really like the scene that shows that the most is when they put the barn up and how everyone comes together, and that kind of shows what the culture is and a community that comes together for one new family kind of thing, and everyone does it for every new family. So and everyone comes together and builds a new barn every so often. So I thought that was a really cool moment.
The world building in this movie is excellent, and I think the Kelly McGillis character is problematic. I mean, just the random nudity at one point was just inexplicable to me, and I don't want to turn this into. I'm not somebody who believes that all sex scenes in movies are pointless. That is not what this is about. But if you are going to have nudity, or if you're going to have a sex scene, like, provide some sort of context for it, provide some sort of a point for it, and it felt very out of place in this movie, especially for somebody who is meant to be modest and has never been anything but. But again, Brian, I mean, I think that is the power of one Harrison Ford, who again is kind of playing the hero role, but this takes him away from the science fiction fantasy genres. This is not Blade Runner. This is not Indiana Jones. This is Star Wars. Here he's playing just a normal Philadelphia police officer. We do not get Harrison Ford putting on a Philadelphia accent, which I'm relieved by, because I don't think it would have turned out very well. And of course, this got him his only Best Academy Award nomination for Best Actor, which is unfortunate that he has never really been able to get a role for himself that would earn another. But I guess Peter Weir, the director of this movie, he claimed that the most violent scene he'd ever filmed took place in the men's room at the beginning of the film, the kind of the big incident that causes the rest of the action here. And even today, he believes it's still a bit too violent, which is wild to me, because I think, given all the recent movies, especially your John Wicks and some of these action movies, like the violence has only gotten more extreme, and you're even seeing it on TV and not just in movies at this point. And yeah, it's just really fascinating. But I think one of the reasons that it comes across so brutal is because we do see it through the eyes of a child, which I only think makes it more brutal. And we can get into sort of the dynamics of the first act in a few minutes. But I think one of the more famous stories from Raiders of the Lost Ark is there was a big fight scene and Harrison Ford got ill, so they had to cut it down. This is another case where Harrison Ford got ill, and 10 pages of dialogue had to be thrown out in the final scene between John and Rachel. And I have to be honest, I didn't need 10 pages of dialogue. I think that their goodbye was simple. I think it worked out for the best. So yeah, I don't know what to say. Any feelings on kind of that final scene with John and Rachel?
Yeah, I felt like the romance part was forced, and I felt like, again, it was kind of bordering on like the fetishizing of taking this hot Amish woman and make her, I want to make her mine or whatever, and then, it just kind of felt like this was just so out of place, and I felt like they could have cut that like subtext out or the subplot out and made it an even tighter movie, and it would have been even tighter and even have this even better pacing to it. But it's a Paramount movie, so they're going for like that general audience, and this movie made a ton of money. We got to mention, ton of money in the box office for what, a mid-level, budgeted drama for 1984, 5, whatever. I mean, you can't even do those kind of numbers today with a drama, I don't think. So this was definitely for the general audience, which is why they did this, romantic angle with Kayla McGinnis. And that's, if this was more of an independent movie, I don't see that, I would see maybe they would cut that out and then maybe add a little more like the cop stuff, which is what I wanted. But that ending was fine. The only thing that bothered me about that ending is when she, dramatically takes the bonnet off and goes outside and gives him a kiss. I was like, everyone could see you, and you were just like, everyone was talking about you, and you're trying to like not be a pariah, but you're displaying this, kiss of affection in public in front of all the Amish people that can see you. So I was like, maybe they should have filmed this on the, inside their room or something, so it wouldn't be so like, like as if she was trying to purposely be looked at kissing Harrison Ford in front of everybody. You know what I mean?
I mean, I think it's the big romantic moment of the movie, or at least it's intended to be. And whether you buy that or not, I think that's the whole idea. And I think that because there is a sense of panache, I think that's why they shot it outside, because of the visuals of being outside as opposed to being like locked up inside in these barns or these wooden houses. So you mentioned like this movie basically made like the equivalent of $170 million. And in 1985, it made like 60 to 68, which is like, it's not terrible, but I think for 1985 money, that's really solid. And like I said, now that's almost $200 million. And that would put you probably top 10 for the box office for the year, I would say. So that means it's very successful. So there was a point I had to send Brian a very important screenshot because this is the film debut of one Viggo Mortensen. And of course, there was a historic scene with Han Solo and Aragorn in the same shot. Brian, how did this make you feel when you saw those two together?
I was waiting for some dialogue and I didn't get any. So that was disappointing. And I think they gave Viggo like some off-camera lines or something where you can see him move his mouth, but no actual audible dialogue. I have a feeling he wasn't getting paid for dialogue, if you know what I mean. Because in Hollywood and TV shows and productions, you get paid for talking. And if you don't talk, you're an extra pretty much, and you get paid differently. So it seems like they asked him to not say anything so they could pay him less money. That's just my theory as to why he had no dialogue. But I was like, damn, I wish he would have said something. But then I was like, oh, they're probably just paying him extra money. But that was pretty cool, like a cool little moment. And God, I mean, he looks so, I don't know, like not young, but like he looked like he was already like in his 30s. So when he played, oh man, he's probably what, it was 50s, and when he played Aragon. So shit. He's older than I thought.
He's one of those people that looks like he was born at 35.
Yeah, and damn, I didn't realize how old he was. You know what I mean? Until now.
I mean, he's in his
40 years ago.
Now. Yeah, he's in his 60s now. And Harrison Ford, I guess, joined the Philadelphia Police Department on a number of raids. Brian, just imagine you're on the other end of one of these raids and you see Harrison Ford there. What are you thinking about in that moment? You're being arrested, this huge raid by the police department, and you see Harrison Ford there.
I just try to make sure there's no snakes in the car.
I see what you did there. So the screenplay is well known, won an Academy Award. The film script has become a frequent model for budding screenwriters, often used to display the clear structure of a screenplay. I think that does it extremely well. And this was voted the 80th best screenplay of all time by the Writers Guild of America, which has been very much in the news as of late. We'll talk more about the Writers Guild a little bit later, but yeah, just an extremely well-regarded screenplay.
So I looked it up, and this might be my little side rant on the 1986 Academy Awards, but so here's the other nominations for Best Original Screenplay: Back to the Future, Brazil, The Official Story, and The Purple Rose of Cairo. I'm not going to mention the last two because, you know, Woody Allen's kind of like out the door now, and I've never even heard of Official Story. Brazil is kind of this cult movie that has been kind of spread around, and it's kind of for like those sci-fi heads out there that like weird sci-fi. Back to the Future, I think, honestly, is the better screenplay. So that's kind of where I'm at. And Back to the Future was not nominated for Best Picture. Out of Africa was the one that won that year. Witness was also nominated, of course. Prizzy's Honor, which I've seen at the video store so many times that I never rented. It's actually directed by John Huston, which has me interested now. Kiss of the Spider Woman, I've heard good things about. And then The Color Purple as well, which I think is one of Steven Spielberg's weaker films. So in terms of like all that competition, I would say Witness and Back to the Future are better than any of those movies nominated for Best Picture that I've seen, or like, you know, the Best Original Screenplay nominations or whatever. So there you go. That's kind of my little rant right there. So I feel like Back to the Future kind of got screwed over at the Oscars this particular year, but you know, Harrison Ford did get that Oscar nomination for Best Actor. He lost to William Hurt, and depending on how you feel about William Hurt, but you know, Jack Nicholson, Jon Voight, James Garner, it's a hell of a fucking category there. But I don't know. This wasn't even Harrison Ford's best performance, I would say, over the years, which is kind of strange to me that this is the one that he got the nomination for. But again, when it comes to nominations, it's all about comparing it to the releases of that particular year. So it's, you can't really, say like, oh, this was not even his best performance and blah, 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 and he got the nomination. But, because to me, I think, I don't know, maybe his best performance, my favorite performance might be The Fugitive, but that's just me.
I would say this is still, like, in terms of his performance, I would still say this is top tier in my mind. So I'm not sure. The problem is, I think when you look at the screenplay of Back to the Future, it's probably one of the greatest screenplays that's ever been written. But I think the respect for that screenplay has only come in recent years, and I don't think that there is an appreciation for it like there should be. And if you were to ask me which is the better screenplay, I would tell you I still think it's Back to the Future. But Witness is also really, really good. And it's just funny that we probably got two of the maybe like 100 best screenplays of all time in the same year, and it just happened to work out that way. But I would still say this is still an above average screenplay. Let's get into kind of the plot mechanics, and I'm gonna let Brian talk about the third act because I know he really appreciated it. The thing that I loved so much is like the setup. I think the first 30 minutes or so of this movie is really strong, and it just, the simple ways that it establishes the world. I love the moments when they show the carriage, like the carriage is holding up like traffic at one point. I really love that moment, just showing the contrast, the tension between the Amish community and the quote unquote modern world. I love when we see the carriage like just in front of a gas station. It's those simple moments that really get across the differences, and it's not something that you have to beat audiences over the head with. I think just creating that visual moment is extraordinary. The other thing that I really like is that we get so much of the first half hour of this movie is from the perspective of Lucas Haas, who plays the young boy. And like, there's a point when they are in the train station. So the idea is that they are going from Amish country to Philadelphia and then on to Baltimore to see Rachel's sister. And while they're in Philadelphia, the 8-year-old boy, Samuel, first he sees this like adult with a beard who he assumes is, I guess, Amish as well. But I believe that he is coded as a Hasidic Jew, or a more conservative faction of the Jewish community. And then he eventually has to go to the bathroom, and that's where he witnesses this horrendous incident. And Samuel goes into the men's room, witnesses the brutal murder of an undercover police officer, and that is kind of the impetus for the plot. But the way that this is done is just so impressive, because Samuel has to use a little bit of ingenuity, and I think you could argue, would Samuel be this intelligent? Maybe, maybe not. But I think it makes you immediately sympathize with him. And I also think it gets you away from the idea that this is like the Goonies, or this is like so many of those other kids' movies. Like, he is a much more grounded character, and because of that, I think his performance is very grounded. This doesn't feel as big or as broad as, again, like the Goonies or some of your other, like even a Stand By Me. Like, this is very clearly like, this is a young child in an adult world, and I think they do a great job of showing that in the first half hour and making us sympathize with him, and because of that, also sympathizing with the community that he's a part of.
For sure. I want to go back a little bit before that, though. I felt like the opening was really well done as well, where it's the funeral of Kaylee McGinnis's husband. So I guess her husband just died, like, recently, and the events of in Philadelphia and the funeral are pretty much tied close together in terms of time frame. And it kind of establishes this background that she, she's longing for like that, that husband type like person in her life that has just been gone. So I feel like they could have touched on that a little more, because I felt like her character was going through a lot, and they didn't give her time to, like, you see her crying her eyes out at the beginning. Obviously she just lost her husband, but there was no like reflection on her husband other than like giving Harrison Ford her some extra clothes that her husband had. So I thought that was a really interesting setup, because it establishes this idea that she's a widow now, so that even makes it even more complicated with the romantic angle and all that. So that was a good setup too. And then, they really don't explain why they go to Philadelphia. I guess they're just kind of visiting. And I guess, Amish people go out of town sometimes and just kind of chill and
Well,
look at Philadelphia.
they're going to Baltimore to visit the sister, and I guess they have
They stop in Philadelphia or whatever.
Yes, and I don't know if you've ever taken Amtrak, Brian, but the only interactions that I've ever had with Amish and people, and maybe even Mennonites, is through Amtrak, because that's because they don't believe in cars and they don't believe in modern technology. The Amtrak, I'm sure, is a very huge part of their travel plans.
Wow. Okay, so they even got that down more. So, very impressed with the details then, because I was kind of like, why are they even traveling anyway? But that makes more sense. So that's more credit to the screenplay. And then you talk about how brutal that opening or the murder is. To me, what makes it so brutal is that in a lot of these John Wick type movies you mentioned, I don't think we actually see someone's throat being slit unless it's like a horror movie or like a slasher movie. But we really saw this dude's throat get slit, and I was just like, holy shit! I didn't even remember that when I watched it 20 years ago, late night on Showtime when I watched it, back in 2002 or whatever, at midnight. I watched this at 10 p.m., so it wasn't so late, but that was incredibly eye-opening. I think that's what it is, because you normally don't see a person's throat cut open unless it's a horror movie. And going in as a general audience, it comes off as a shock because the general audience is not used to that. So I think that adds to it. And then you mentioned the fact that it's from Lucas Haas's perspective. Because I love it when, they have whenever there's this trope of the eyewitness, right? It's usually behind a closed door with a little bit of a creak open, and you see it through the little creak hole. And they had that little shot there too as well. And then when Danny Glover's going through the stalls trying to figure out if there was any eyewitnesses, and then he noticed one's locked, and then it kind of sets him off oh shit, someone's here, and then he can't find the witness, and then it makes it even more dramatic because he knows that someone was there, so that adds to it. If he killed him without knowing someone was there, I think it would have changed the whole dynamic of it. But knowing that there was an eyewitness, it adds to the effect, that something is up. So I felt like that whole setup was great. And then even so, what I would say, the first act is still when he's talking to his boss, right? And then the boss calls Danny Glover, and then they have that attempted shootout in the elevator. Yeah, that whole everything was just so well done. I felt like it was just this tight suspense, right from the moment from the murder happens to the questioning to him going to his sisters and the eyewitness protection stuff. It was very tight. In that first act. So yeah, I think I gotta agree that first act is probably the best of the three acts, even though I really appreciate the third act and the way that it's broken down.
So eventually, it's Detective Sergeant John Book, as played by Harrison Ford, and his partner Sergeant Elton Carter, as played by Brent Jennings. Brian, I don't know, have you seen Moneyball?
Yes, I have.
That is Ron Washington. Brent Jennings plays Ron Washington in that movie.
Oh shit! Well, there you go. So,
yes,
I was just talking about Moneyball too.
Somewhere.
I was just talking about Moneyball with my friends. So, yeah, perfect timing.
So they are trying to get Samuel to identify. They show him mugshots. They take him to lineups. They take him to. There's a little bit of racism as they just run into a club and pick up. It comes across they pick off some random black guy, and I have to say, I have to give Samuel a lot of credit. And again, I think this kind of stretches the credulity of the situation, because what are the odds that Samuel has ever seen a black person in his life, especially being so young and living in that part of Pennsylvania, and still being able to specifically identify Danny Glover's character? I mean, it's almost a superpower. If he is the greatest witness of all time, you could see why they named the movie after him.
Look, I thought the same thing, and I was just look, maybe he just was really good at details, because, he was able to describe him at least, the bulk. In terms of his size, in terms of the person. So, because the people they brought in were not necessarily the thin people, because he kept telling Harrison Ford he was a bulky dude. So yeah, it's questionable at best, but he was able to identify the correct murder, and I think the way it happened was well done, because he's just looking around, and all of a sudden he sees these police fucking headline articles in the display case, and boom, the music cue. And I think once that music cue hit, it sets up this whole other layer to the movie that you weren't expecting.
And John Book clearly understands what's going on as well. Like, there is realization in his face as well, and that's also something that I mean that the whole scene in the police station is great, because I mean Samuel is a fish out of water, and the police don't quite know what to make of him. He doesn't know what to make of them. I love the scene with the prisoner. Like, he's trying to get the kid to like release him from the handcuffs, but they don't reveal he's a prisoner for a minute. It's just, I mean, the setup is so great, and just I think the setup is so good that even in the weaker moments in the second half, just things are done so well. I think the other thing that I really like is I like the idea that John Book is annoyed by having to protect them in some ways, but he never takes it out on them, if that makes sense. And that is also something that I really like, because he does a great job, I think, of establishing trust. And even if you don't like the romantic angle between Rachel and Detective Book, I think you have to appreciate the fact that they establish John Book as the type of person who is very charismatic, but is also very trustworthy.
Yeah, and I think you really get that when he talked to his sister. Because at first I was like, oh no, is this like his first ex-wife, and he's got these problems at home because he can't have a stable relationship? Well, it turns out he still can't. It's just he chooses not to, because he's just always on the run, going from woman to woman kind of thing going on. And he's got to criticize for that from Rachel, because Rachel talked to his sister. So I thought that little thing was a great way to establish Book's character very well and what he's all about. And it seems to be he's like, you know, by the book, quote unquote. And once this corruption starts unfolding in front of him, he starts to realize that things are probably beyond his control. Which anytime that happens, I think in real life, when things are beyond your control, you start kind of unraveling a little bit. And I felt like, he started unraveling a little bit, and then he got shot, which made it even worse. But then after that, once you go to the second act, he starts rebuilding himself. He starts trying to figure out like what to do. But then it seems like the plot kind of comes to him, which is fine. So, like, because sometimes when protagonist kind of runs away from things, like the plot just comes back to him, like Lion King. So in this case, it's kind of almost the same thing. And then we can talk about that third act, but I think the whole like setup in the second, or in the beginning, tying in the conspiracy. I just wish the conspiracy seemed bigger, which it does feel like it's this bigger like thing of like the which cops are on the take and which cops are like doing shady things, but they only reveal 3 of them. And we talked about this like kind of once we finished the movie, and we were just like, this has got to be a bigger like conspiracy, because there's no way it's just these 3 cops and they're just the ones like doing all this corruption. There's got to be something bigger, which is why I kind of want to see like a Witness mini series, and you kind of build that, because like I feel like there's a lot
which
of
is which I want to point out, I think is a terrible idea, having seen other shows turned into these extended mini series. It almost never works. Please don't do it. Leave the memories alone. This is what we have. It's fine. It's not the plot mechanics are not great, but there is no possible way that you can do a better job of developing the characters, because that's just not something that I think TV shows do anymore, is really shape the characters better, because everybody is so focused on plot and cliffhangers and that business, because that's the nature of streaming shows. So I don't think there's a way that they will do it right. So don't do it at all, and just leave it alone. It's just fine. Like, this movie is great. It's flawed, but it's fine. If you're going to remake something that is either mediocre, disappointing, or bad. You don't need to remake this movie.
Listen, I get you, but you even pointed out how much that Schaefer character, or anytime that actor shows up,
yes,
something's up.
Joseph Summers.
Joseph Summers. And I just felt like I wanted to know more, because, like, again, it's this idea that he's this family man, that he's covering up these things, and it's like he has this extended family that we see in the background, and we just don't know what's really going on. And I felt like there was so much meat on the bone there, you know what I mean? Give me like even 5 minutes of more on him, just establishing his whole network and this giant network of bad cops that he's running. Like, I just found it so much more fascinating. And then they kind of went away from that and focused on more on John Book, and I was like, I get it. It's not their story. But I think if you introduce these elements, it just seems like so much more you can explore, and I don't know. I felt like there's a lot on the table left, and because this movie's an hour and 45 minutes or an hour and 50 minutes, and like I said, if you kind of cut some of that romantic stuff out, you could have put a little bit of this extra stuff in and kind of made it even more juicy and even more diabolical to an extent.
Yeah, I have conflicting feelings on that. I like the fact that this movie is an hour and 50 minutes, and I think we need to get back to that in a lot of ways. Having movies that are an hour and 45 to an hour and 50 minutes that are much more character focused and less focused on plot. So I definitely hear what you're saying, but again, I'm not sure what I would be willing to trade to get the moments that you're speaking to. But I mean, Joseph Sumner does a great job. I feel like he plays like this kind of character in a number of movies in the 80s and the early 90s. He is probably, I would guess, probably best known for playing the president in X-Men: The Last Stand, which I don't know if that's necessarily what you want to be known for, but that is probably what most people would remember him as at this point. Eventually, John gets into a kind of a shooting match with Danny Glover's character, and he is able to withstand the pain until they can get Rachel and Samuel home. And that's kind of where the movie kind of shifts, because at first Samuel and Rachel are the fish out of water, but then it's John that becomes the fish out of water as he has to recover from a gunshot wound. He eventually puts on Rachel's husband's clothes. And I think this is where they kind of put more humor into the movie. It becomes less serious because, yes, they're being chased, but there is some downtime. And I think Harrison Ford gets to be his charming self in these moments. And the scene when he comes out and he first has the Amish clothing on it's a pretty great, fantastic moment.
Yeah, talk about not fitting into your clothes, man. Anytime that you do that in the movie, I just laugh because it's just like this visual. Look, anytime someone doesn't fit in their clothes, it's visually funny. I'm sorry. So when you have a much taller dude fitting in a smaller dude's clothes, fat guy in a little coat, so to speak, it just works anytime. And that as little of a laugh as it was compared to a giant laugh that, fat guy in a little coat was, it worked for the moment they were trying to go for. And it made Rachel smile. So that was the moment they were kind of going for, that charm, that kind of romantic moment between the two. And I get it. So it worked. But I think the moment for me that works more is the cow scene, which they actually made fun of in Kingpin. But I think the moment that made me laugh the most was when he was milking the cow, and then the guy's like telling him pull harder, and then Harrison Ford's like, "Oh wait, I got it. I think I got it." I couldn't help myself laugh at that. But and then it made me think of Kingpin and how they made fun of that scene. So yeah, just anytime you're milking a cow at 4 a.m. or 4:30 in the morning or whatever, it's gonna be funny. And apparently they eat a lot of food at 6 a.m. So wow, that did not expect.
Yeah, I mean, they're up pretty early in the morning doing their chores and whatnot. So, yeah, I mean, I think there is a certain amount of exploration that is going on. Samuel and Rachel are in danger. Book. The reason he does not want to go to the hospital is because a gunshot has to be reported to the police, and he believes that this will lead them to find them. So making the sacrifice, so to speak. And again, I think it shows kind of the character of who he is as a person. Maybe he's not the person to get married, but he is someone who will sacrifice and
also
do
for
right.
For the record, really quick, when you mentioned the gunshot wound, there's no bullet because it literally went through him, which is really, really lucky, which most people probably would not have happened to. But there was a big open wound and an exit wound and no bullet. So thank God there was no shrapnel or anything like that, right?
Yeah, it's pretty great. So the funny thing to me is as Book is kind of integrating himself into the community, and there's a lot of tension with what is happening to Rachel, and none of that stuff necessarily goes to like a really dark place. Like the Amish don't turn on Book because of he's trying to romance Rachel, because in fact he denies kind of the romantic overtures, which I very much appreciated, because he knows that if they commiserate and they do the deal, so to speak, that she is going to be ostracized and will no longer be a member of that community, and that's not something that John Book wants. I mean, and that's something I appreciated as well. And Book is having to go into town to use a payphone to call his precinct, which nothing says 1985 at this point, probably more than a damn payphone.
Yeah, but also, oh man, I don't think he should have called the precinct. I think that was a big mistake because, like, I feel like they're
Well,
tracing
I don't think he ever
every line. I don't know, but it's 85. They're probably not tracing all the lines, but it felt
I
like
think
a
we
really
got some
risky
into
move.
that.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. But he also finds out Carter. So Carter gets killed off screen, which is kind of bizarre because they say he's dead. But I think we've gotten ourselves to the point where we are now programmed to think that if they say somebody is dead, that he is going to come back at the end of the movie. And in this case, that's not what this movie is doing. Carter really is actually dead. But it's just weird to me that I think now we're at a point where we would think that Carter's alive. Like, we would actually have to see, like, him being in a body bag, being zipped up for us to actually believe he's dead.
Yeah, that's our jaded selves because we've been, burned so many times by these shows that say characters are gone and then they come back and blah blah blah, and it's a twin or it's a something else, and I can't help but think of Jack Palance in City Slickers 1 and 2, and he plays his own twin, so it was fine because at first I was like, when I heard that I was like, oh, they're lying, something's up, and then I thought about it, and then he hangs up the phone, and then he just stands there, I was like, oh, he is dead. So I was like, they killed his partner off screen. And then I don't know, for some reason I feel like there was this I don't think there is a deleted scene, but I feel like they wrote a scene to kind of show his death, but if they maybe thought it was too much, because let's face it, these cops are brutal. Like they murdered that dude in the beginning with like slicing his throat open. I can only imagine what they did to this guy to kind of cover it up. So yeah, and I felt so bad for the dude because he, like, when he was on the phone with Book, dude, he looked like a nervous wreck. And I'm like, dude, do not be taking this call. They are watching you. Do not do this. And I was right because eventually they figured it out that he was in contact with him. So, yeah, it was a risky move that I would not have taken if I was Carter or Book, man. But I don't know. That's just plot points. And again, it's 85. Maybe he doesn't assume that all the lines are being monitored. But clearly they were because they figured it out. So there you go.
Absolutely. So eventually it gets to a point where Book gets violent. He retaliates against some tourists who are kind of being dicks to the Amish community. This fight reported to the local police, and this is how Schaefer and his hooligans are able to find Book. And Brian, I'm going to turn it over to you so you can talk about what made you enjoy this third act so much, and the tension that has been built and set up, and we get the geography of the space, so we kind of know where everything is. So why don't you talk about what makes the third act so great?
Well, first, before all that, I think we got to mention the fact that the blonde dude from Die Hard is in this movie, and he's not a bad guy. And for some reason, I thought he was going to turn on Book or something crazy like that because he's in love with Rachel. But he didn't. So credit to him for doing that. And he took the ice cream on the face like a champ and didn't swing. So, he's much more of a stronger man than I thought he was in terms of a character. I can't find his name right now, but he's the blonde dude from Die Hard, dude. And he's like so recognizable. So credit to him. I thought he did a great job in terms of what he was trying to do. Like, he's in love with Rachel, but Rachel's kind of like not ready to accept his advances yet because her wife she just lost her husband. But then when Book comes in, she's so open to him, and then he realized, it's like a subtle love triangle that they kind of play upon, but they didn't delve too deep into, which I appreciated because then that would have been a distraction from the main plot. But I like their little interactions between all three of them, and I thought he did a great job. So credit to him. So the third act now. 20 years ago when I watched this movie on Showtime, I remember being just like engrossed at the last 25 minutes of this movie or 20 minutes or whatever it is. And I think it's because of just, like I mentioned before, they establish the geography of the space, right? So they show you the silo, they show you how tall it is, they show you the ladder. And the reason they're showing you this because Luke Haas, the kid, is given a tour to Book about, where things are and where the cows are and everything like that. So when he's being chased, it adds to it because these things about the space. The person, with the cop with the gun doesn't know anything about it, and because the main protagonist, Book, knows everything about the space, he's manipulating the space to catch the guy. And anytime you do that, it's great suspense, and you see it in a lot of suspense movies and stuff like that. But when it's done well, it's done well. And the music, I think, really, really helps. It was like we got to mention like the soundtrack is very synthy, you know what I mean? Because it's 85, but because they're choosing these deep synth sounds, it feels like this tension that's building and building and building, and they do it right because at one point they're at the silo, and Harrison Ford doesn't have a gun, so he's running, but he knows all these little secret passages to get down, where the cows are, to get to the silo. So when he goes down there, they're following him. That one white cop. But the white cop doesn't know anything about where to go, so he's got time to like establish his plan. So fucking Harrison Ford goes all the way to the top of the ladder. And then at one point I was like, oh shit, what is he gonna do now? Like, is he gonna jump or something? Is he gonna jump on top of him? And no, like he realizes that if he goes so far up, he's in the shadow. And of course, when you're looking 20 feet in the air at a dark spot, you're really not going to see what's in the dark spot unless you got like some kind of like crazy vision, right? Of course, the cop can't see shit, so he just walks right on by. And then as he walks right on by, he looks inside the silo and he figures, oh, maybe he's hiding inside the silo. So he goes inside the silo. Harrison Ford thinks on his feet, literally, and releases the grain. And this dude gets like the Sandman and Spider-Man 3, but even more brutal. This dude gets crushed. Well, not crushed. It's basically he suffocates to death from grain because he can't get out of the room because once the grain is at a certain point, the door's jammed. And Harrison Ford knew that. So he basically just drowned the dude in grain. And then he immediately realized, okay, I got to get the gun. And then you're thinking as an audience, oh my God, where's the gun that he had just had? And then you realize, oh shit, he's got to dig for it. So you as an audience are thinking like, oh my God, dig for the gun, dig for the gun. And he's digging for the gun at the same time that Danny Glover's coming in, following behind. And at the same time, you're thinking like, oh my God, is he going to get the gun in time? But the way that this is edited, I think I might be right on this, but I think it's like real time. Like in terms of like him digging the grain, getting the gun away from the dead body, getting out of the door, and then creeping behind the wall. So right when Danny Glover turns left, he goes right into a gunshot. And it was incredible because you knew that, oh my God, he's going to turn right into it. And then he got him right there. So it was great. It was a great moment. Like it wasn't like this big fight between the two, which, they could have done. But I think the way they set it up where he just knew he was coming and turns the corner and then you and his audience member knows like he's going to get him. And then he got him with the shotgun. That was an incredible moment. I thought it was just so well done where they built up that tension. And it's simple stuff, man. So I feel like the music really helped it right there. And then, it kind of gets kind of melodramatic when the whole community comes out to kind of see what's going on. And then, of course, like, you're not going to shoot the guy.
So, Brian, be honest. Did you not think of Spider-Man?
Spider-Man 2?
The first one? No, the one where the New Yorkers, like, you come after Spider-Man, you come after all of us?
Yeah, that's
because I
Spider-Man
immediately
2.
thought of that.
That's what I was thinking. And I was like,
it's tremendous.
Yeah, and I was like, well, he might just shoot him anyway. And what are the Amish going to say? And I guess, well, they're going to just tell the truth. So he's pretty much screwed if he does shoot him. So then you come to this point where like it's like checkmate, right? Because if he shoots him, he's screwed. If he doesn't shoot him, he might have a better chance. So he just turns around and lets Book arrest him in front of the whole Amish community, man. So I was like, wow, what a finale. I thought there was going to be a bigger shootout, but it was just two well-timed, one well-timed shotgun shot, and then the well-timed grain in the silo, and that was that, man. And the way these three guys came into town, it was very much like a Western. They stopped outside of town. There was this dark mist covering as they were entering with the shotguns and everything, and yet somehow they were just outwitted, you know what I mean? And I thought that was a good way to do it because you knew these guys were brutal based on the beginning. So we thought maybe Harrison Ford was going to have to like fight these dudes, and based on that gunfight at the beginning with him and Danny Glover, like something was going to go down, but it turned out to be a sophisticated route to take, and it was like a smart suspense move.
Yeah, I mean, I think the third act is very good. I think it's just, again, the setups and payoffs are tremendous. And I love the moment in the end when Book says goodbye to Samuel in the fields, and he gets wished well, and they keep referring to him as English, even though he's, of course, from Philadelphia. But I love the idea that they wish him luck out there among the English, and then that's when Book leaves. And it's a really great ending. It's, again, this movie is just so well executed, and Yeah, I think that's a really good place to leave off. So in terms of strengths, I have a long list of strengths, Brian. So I think the great world building of the community, seeing the inciting incident from the perspective of the boy, I think is really strong. Harrison Ford's lead performance, and you mentioned the ending, and I think like I would bet the moment when he gives the speech was the moment that they showed at the Academy Awards, because it is very much like an Oscar-y speech, and I think it's a perfect payoff to that character. Balancing the treatment, I think Kelly McGinnis, I think the character, I think the problems with Rachel are not the performance. So I would say Kelly McGillis does a great job. The screenplay is Academy Award winning, of course, it's great, and I also love the music too. Let's bring the synthesizer back, Brian. That's what I say. Any other strengths? Anything you want to respond to?
The cinematography, man, like right from the start, I felt like this is what like higher end cinematography is supposed to look like. You know what I mean? Like all they're showing you is farms and fields and grains, but it looks fucking amazing. And it's like I feel like we take those kind of shots for granted nowadays in film. And yeah, just simple like looking things like that, like like Superman 1, where he's in the middle of the field with his family, man. Like it's images like that that I feel like we take for granted, and like I don't know. And then of course, my thing about putting the camera on the ground. There were a lot of instances in this movie where they put the camera on the ground to establish these wide shots. You know what I mean? So I mentioned in John Wick 4 recently how they did that very well, putting the camera on the ground. They did it in this movie as well. And I don't think I was watching it. Yeah, it wasn't 4K. Like whatever it is on Amazon Prime is not, I don't think 4K. But if you could somehow watch this on 4K, I think it would even enhance it even more, because they're just the visuals of the farmland and all that kind of thing. And even when like I don't know if you noticed this too, but like in that funeral scene at the beginning, like the way they shot the room was like, I forget the term, but it's very much structured like The Shining, where The Shining is like all the shots are parallel, like they can kind of fold into each other and be the same. And there was at one point where like that funeral shot in those two rooms on an angle, you can kind of like see the symmetry going on there. So the cinematography is well done in this movie, and I think that really helps with the suspense. And of course, I mentioned the music. So all that tied together, I think that when you have the music and the cinematography going for you, you could have these weak spots in the script. But again, like Jerome mentioned, like it's a very well executed movie. So when you well execute something like that, you can kind of forget those plot elements because you're so engrossed in the moment, like I was when it came down to that chase scene at the end. So I think that's the strength of this movie, is the well executed stuff. And I think, we mentioned Peter Weir. He hasn't done anything in 10 years, right? I would say that, I think Master and Commander's pretty underrated just because the plot's not that great. But I think, again, visuals are amazing. So, that's kind of where he's at, I think. And he's done other movies as well, but I think The Witness and Master and Commander are the two that stand out the most for me in terms of him.
In terms of weaknesses, I would say the cop corruption not being altogether clear. Elton Carter dying off screen, also kind of a weakness. And I would say the Rachel character in general is a little bit half-baked. And I think that's pretty typical for this kind of role in 1985. It's really unfortunate. If you were going to remake this as a movie, which I almost think would be preferable, I think doing the movie from Rachel's perspective is probably the direction that I would go in. But again, I would not advocate for that, because I think, again, this is the kind of movie I think it's not worth remaking. But if you were to do it, I think redoing it from Rachel's perspective is what makes the most sense, because especially now when we have a million cop dramas and whatnot.
I'm pretty much in agreement on the weaknesses, because those were the two areas that I were kind of like, eh. I mentioned the romance angle could have, you could have cut that, and I think it would have been fine. I mentioned that this idea that it's this hot Amish woman, right? So that kind of was like a little rubbed me the wrong way a little bit too much. But other than that, that's kind of where I'm at. And I already mentioned that I wish they kind of just kind of gave us this even more, open look into the world of these corrupt cops. And like I mentioned, that one character, man, Joseph Summers or whatever, Somer, he's just this fascinating character that I felt like was like, man, you could do a whole show on that character, and almost like this Tony Soprano kind of character, but from a corrupt cop perspective, and he's the one leading this whole district cops. That's a story I think you can tell. You know what I mean? So there's a lot left on the table, but maybe they could turn that plot idea and turn it into a modern day idea or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think you should watch The Shield if that's what you want, if that's what you're looking for.
I did back in the day for a few episodes, but I wasn't really into the performances. I felt it was too macho.
I mean, you should probably give it a rewatch. You might be more used to the style of the filmmaking more so now than back in the day. But yeah, that's really all I could say. So I'm going to do something special for MVP in honor, quote unquote, of the honors of the writer's strike that is maybe going on as you are still listening to this for the months of June and July. I will be highlighting the screenwriters for the MVP award, and I am very lucky that in this case the screenwriters of this movie are Academy Award winners. They won the Academy Award for Best Screenplay. But this is what I will be doing in the month of June and July. This is no offense to any of the other performances or the director or anyone else, but I will be highlighting the screenwriters for every movie the next 2 months. In this case, Earl W. Wallace and William Kelly won the Academy Award, and as we all believe, or I think most right-thinking people believe, when it comes to movies and TV shows, it always starts with the writers. Without the writers, we would not have any of the things that we talk about here at The Real World, be it movie or TV show. So, Brian, who is your MVP?
You know what? I agree, because that's kind of where I was going with anyway, and I was going to go maybe with the cinematographer. But John Seale is a cinematographer. But yeah, I agree, because if you look at their what they've written kind of post this writing team, it's kind of like TV stuff and like romantic TV stuff. You know what I mean? So I was kind of thrown back as to wow, like they started with this and then ended up doing like TV stuff. But you know, everyone's got a different path. So those are my MVPs, and then best performance. I would say it's like a tie almost. Because I think Harrison Ford and Kelly McGillis were on equal footing on this, with Lucas Haas and a close race behind them. What do you think?
I'm giving it to Harrison Ford. I mean, he got the Academy Award nomination, so I think that makes it a little obvious. I mean, I think Lucas Haas does a very good job. I think all of the performances in this movie are either good or above average, but I mean, this is Harrison Ford at the peak of his powers in terms of charisma, in terms of delivery, in terms of the energy, the humor, just really great stuff across the board, I would say.
Yeah. For me, I feel like Kelly McGillis is just so, like, she was so good in this, and I felt like they could have taken her character even to higher levels if they made her a little more like, take a stand on certain things and not take his bullshit. But, it's Harrison Ford's charm, and I get that. That's the whole point of it, right? So there's that fine line, you know what I mean? Because I mentioned that scene where, like, they're dancing to music, and she's hearing music for the first time, right? And I just felt like that's kind of like going against her character a little bit. But, again, they were trying to do that thing of, like, bring in this Amish person into the real world kind of gimmick or whatever. But they kind of played upon that and not crossed the line, though.
So there is one note that I did not mention. Harrison Ford and Peter Weir developed such a good working relationship that Ford immediately signed on to star in Weir's next project, The Mosquito Coast. That is the movie that we will be discussing next week here on Pantheon Plus. Now, there is the Apple adaptation that has gone 2 seasons. We are not discussing that. We are discussing the 1986 film version with Harrison Ford, Helen Mirren, young Helen Mirren, and River Phoenix. So both Indiana Joneses also going to be in that movie as well.
And we can talk about how much I enjoyed River Phoenix as a young performer. And even though I haven't seen all of his movies, I think he was a tremendous young actor, and I think he is my favorite part of Indiana Jones 3. So there you go.
Any final thoughts before we end the podcast, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, check this movie out for sure. And it's under 2 hours. So that part going in, I was like, this is going to be a great experience. Cause me and Jerome are on this under 2 hour movie kind of kick right now. And I think we're both in agreement, like a movie like Air fits perfectly into that category of what we're talking about. of just like a great script, great performances. It's under 2 hours, gets the job done, has a great speech. This has some of those, similar kind of things, and in the end, Harrison Ford has a great speech in the I wouldn't say speech, but just like telling him, "What are you gonna do? Shoot me? You gonna shoot her? You gonna shoot the kid?" So yeah, there you go.
Absolutely. We want to thank everyone for listening this week, and we will be back next week to discuss the Mosquito Coast. Thanks again. Have a great week.
God, I'm an idiot. I forgot Peter Weir directed fucking The Truman Show, for crying out loud.